So we are now proceeding to the flight controller. So this ESC and the flight controller plugs straight in via this ESC cable. So there's not much to do between the FC and the ESC. So it's pretty nice knowing that you have a flight controller and an ESC that you could just plug right in and it will work. Although you have to check, and I say double, triple, quadruple check if you're using other stacks. You have to make sure that the manual is correct, that you have followed the manual correctly, or in some instances I have actually had the manual to be wrong, and that caused the ESC to burn. From then on, I have made it a practice to whip out my multimeter and put it in continuity mode. So another tip that I have for you is that when connecting your flight controller to your ESC, one way to make sure that you won't burn it is by using a multimeter in continuity mode. So continuity mode is the beep that it makes when the contacts have continuity with each other. So what you want to do is put one probe in your negative side, negative power lead, and you want to touch the USB. When that ground is properly connected, that's one thing less to worry about. That means that the ground is connected properly. As for the VBAT wire, you have to really make sure with your manual that is correct. One way to do it is to find a VBAT pad on the flight controller and probe it to the connector to see which is which. So in this case, this pad is a VBAT pad, and to find the corresponding VBAT pin in the ESC, you just have to probe it one by one. In this case, I know that it's the second one from my right. So there you go, it has continuity. So we know that we have connected at least the VBAT and ground correctly, which is really important because you can mix and match the signal wires and it really won't hurt your parts physically, but you will have problems later on with Betaflight. So now we are proceeding to the flight controller. The flight controller has three main parts that you connect to it, which is the camera, VTX, and your receiver. So this is with racing builds, since racing builds are pretty bare bones. Other builds can include GPS, barometer, and other things like that, but I haven't really explored with those. As going back to the build, we will now be installing the flight controller to our drone, and we are going to connect these three peripherals to it. So let's do that. I'd like to zoom in a bit. So actually, if you have it, I'm using two thinner diameter 6040 solder. The one that I was using was 8 millimeter diameter, 0.8 mm solder, so that is good for like battery leads, motor wires where you need more solder in a pinch. This, I think 0.5 works better for flight controller applications because you wouldn't be dabbing too much where you might not want it to be. So for this flight controller, the neat thing about this is that the camera and VTX pads are all right here, and it's all labeled. For using an S-Bus or iBus receiver, I believe that it is here. But for my application, I want my 5-volt ground and TAX and RX. So I just want an open serial port, and right here in the back side of the ESC of the flight controller, I mean, we have exactly that. So we have ground, 5-volt, we have TX and RX. So the next thing to do, what I would do at least, is to tin these pads. So I'll be using ground, just get that there, using ground, 5-volt. That's what I was saying. So when things like that happen, you could just dab your soldering tip to some flux, and what you want to do, just swipe it down the middle, and you can see that bridge is gone. So actually, you wouldn't want your solder pad to have too much solder, especially with these very thin wires. You just want it to have just enough for it to have a good connection. So the Rancom Nano actually comes with this plug because it's directly soldered with the camera. So actually I will be using a 3-pin connector that goes in the camera, so that I will still have the ability to remove it. So just tin the wires while we're at it. Okay, so actually I'm using a bit lower temperature. For the motor wires, I was using around 390. For wires like this, I come down to around 370 degrees Celsius. So ground is there. That's ground. Ground. It's 5-volt. And this is camera. And next thing to do is to put some wires for our VTX. Actually, another tip, these wires that I'm using for the TBS Pro 32 are ESC wires. So I have a bunch of these old lying around. I just cut them up and use them for peripherals like this. The ones that comes with the TBS stuff are pretty okay. They're pretty thicker in terms of the wire gauge, but I find that with these types of electronics and at the current that they're drawing, you don't really need that much. So I have noticed that using the ESC wires are pretty much adequate for the use that you need it to. The reason for using these, for opting to use these, is that they're pretty flexible. That means that you could bend them whichever way you want, and you're confident that you will not easily break it. So with tiny gauge wires like this, I actually just strip them very small to the edge, so that I don't really have to swirl it at the end, or to twist it. Just barely exposing wire. Okay. To again tin them. So in the Pro 32, it's signal. It's your smart audio, your video wire, and your ground. And your 5V. Okay. That we'll be using the Furious Air LHCP antenna. But actually, applying the same technique that I used with the ESC. I'm gonna brush that down. Okay. See, I know this we're gonna do that. It's my best. Okay, so for this particular build, I only want UFL antenna since I want it to be pretty light. Okay, clip them on there. We're using clear heat shrink. Just have a bunch of them right here. We're going to use this. Just cut them up to length. So you can see that this heat shrink is a tiny bit too small. What you want to do with that is get some pliers, stretch it to whatever size you need. In this case, that'll be enough. Maybe some more stretching is needed. Good. So now that we have our V2X ready, how that will go into the build is that it'll be stuck to the top plate. So these wires would have to go right back under the FC. So we have to leave some slack, some wire length to be able to reach our flight controller without any problems. So just have to bundle them up. They say around 4.5 centimeters for this build be enough. We're gonna take that much excess wire. That's what we're gonna solder onto our flight controller. So again, we'll tune them up. Okay. Oops, sorry. I'm gonna come back to our flight controller. Have that, so that's asking for ground. Five volt. VTX. Shave off a little more from the smart audio wire. Okay, so wires up that way. So basically, VTX will come up something looking like that. Okay. So the last thing to mount is our receiver. Actually, took this from a previous build. That's why it had some wires already, so I just cut them up. So for the crossfire, we actually have to crisscross these two. Take out our tweezer. I think it's there, right there. also the reason why I have my receiver wire so short is that I actually just fold it up, fold it right over, and stick it right on top of the flight controller. So that's how I do my builds exclusively. Either I have both the VTX and the receiver resting on the flight controller, like with my 30 by 30 builds. But in the times that I cannot put my my VTX on top of the flight controller, this is what I do. So actually just again measure around that length. Right over there. There. Same principle that I did. The flight controller is basically done. So I'll spray it with some alcohol. Brush. Fill this guy right here. Okay, so I want to just paste my receiver right under there. That, by the way, is glass acrylic tape. I have found it to have pretty good uses for what we do for drones. They are pretty. They're pretty high bond, and they do not leave any residue, and they are pretty heat resistant.